Every time a raid is released in old school RuneScape, a Giga weapon comes with it. With Calcs came the T-Bow, with Tob came the Scythe, and with the newest raid, Tombs of a Masket, we got Osmumten's Fang. Okay, obviously I'm kidding a bit. The Shadow of Tumekin is very, very good, and much better than the Fang, but the Fang is insane in its own ways. It's good in a lot of places, and even best in slots some places, and some places might surprise you. To start off with, let's look at a boss that has received a lot of discussion regarding the Fang, which is Corporeal Beast. First though, let me ask you a question. At what defense level do you think the Zamorakian Spear starts to outperform the Fang? For context, Corp has a defense of 350, and this isn't a trick question or anything, but the answer might surprise you. I initially thought about 150 defense. After all, the Fang stats are decent, but nothing to write home about for a 5-tick weapon, and its effect is focused on accuracy, so I thought it would really only be good against higher defense targets. Well, it turns out the break-even point is 19 defense. Yes, 19 out of 350, which is the same, coincidentally, as 19 Arclight specs, or 8 Dragon Warhammer specs. The Fang is just that much better, even against medium to low defense. So, the Fang is definitely at least worth bringing to Small Team Corp. I'm not 100% familiar with Small Team Corp or the boosting strategy, because I can't do either of them, but I imagine that it must be worth bringing, because I'm pretty sure from what I've seen you don't get 8 Dragon Warhammer specs in, and even if you do, if you miss some of them, then the Fang will still be better than the Z-Spear, so probably worth bringing for small teams. For solo though, it's a bit more interesting, so here's the conundrum. The Fang is literally so good that it's not even worth speccing down Corp's defense, besides maybe 2 Dragon Warhammers as you run in the room. It's actually insane. Like, the Fang hits 83.7% of the time using my setup on a full defense Corp. For comparison, the Z-Spear only has a 49% chance to hit. That's like 70% higher than a Z-Spear. So that sounds great, right? You can just run in and hit it with the Fang. But at full stats, Corp absolutely shreks you, and it also forces you to lose a ton of time eating because you take so much damage. But the only way to reduce Corp's magic stat in particular is to fully reduce his attack strength and defense to 0, just because of how the BGS special attack works, which is the most consistent way to drain stats. You need everything else to be 0 in order for it to start draining magic. Unless we bring out the secret and amazing Seer Call tech. The Seer Call actually happens to be one of the only weapons in the entire game that can drain magic level straight from the get-go, no other stat draining necessary. And the even better part is, it has 100% accuracy on the spec. I don't know if you guys understand how crazy this is, but that solves both our problems in one go. I mean, first of all, you have to drain Corp's magic level without draining his other stats. And second of all, he's gonna have full defense, so you need to be able to hit him. So the Seer Call seems like the perfect solution. But, as I found out the hard way, it only works once. As in, once you apply a magic stat debuff to the Corp with the Seer Call special, you cannot do it again until its magic level fully restores back to its original value. So, big F on that theory. I was honestly really excited. I thought I'd stumbled upon something meta-changing, but sadly not. So what it seems like overall is that the Fang is worth switching to in those unalive self strategies where you make massive food piles, but to me that's a sus method. Like, it uses so many supplies, it's very annoying, and the time save overall is like not that huge since you have to spend time doing the death piles and of course eat the whole kill. So I just don't really like that, but if you do already use that strategy, then you're probably going to replace the Z-Spear with a Fang, and you can save on some defense lowering specs. Unless, of course, Jagex buffs the Seer Call. I mean, come on, this thing needs some love. I see posts on Reddit for buffing the Seer Call all the time. If Jagex made it a 50% special attack instead of 100 and let it stack, this would actually be the new meta, I'm pretty sure. You could spend a minute or two speccing down Corp's magic level with the Seer Call and just run in with the Fang. But until then, this is dead. Next, let's see who would win. A weapon forged in the God Wars, modified by barbarian warriors, augmented with the power of the Dragonkin, and enchanted specifically to kill dragons. Or one Stabby Boy. Yes, honestly, the Fang performs better than the Dragon Hunter Lance in a lot of scenarios, including KBD. It's 12% better than the Lance there, in my setup at least. That makes it about on par with the Dragon Hunter crossbow, and still worse than a Twisted Bow. The Fang also excels against metal dragons, starting from steel and going all the way through rune. So that's right, on your AFK full Justy ults, in Osmumten's Fang is even better than the Lance for the rune dragons. It's also quite good against regular Hydras, which oddly have more defense than the Alchemical Hydra, and Skeletal Wyverns and Ancient Wyverns. Alright guys, I know not what madness has befallen me, but I am here at Callisto on peak hours of a weekday night. So, let's see how this goes. Also, I don't even know if I remember how to lure this thing. I think I don't. Yep, I don't. Alright, I know this doesn't look super impressive, but... okay, good. But you gotta realize how tanky this thing is. Like, if you've ever tried to kill Callisto before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah, the Fang is very good at Callisto. It's way better than the Seldor. It's even better than the Scythe, and depending on what gear you risk and whether or not you're on a task, it can even be better than Vigorous Chain Mace, which is absolutely crazy to me, and it's kind of a similar story for Chaos Elemental. On a side note, it's also very good for PKing. I mean, I think we could have all predicted that a weapon that can roll for accuracy twice is going to be pretty good at PKing. Next on the list is, well, Nex. Now, I think it was very obvious that the Fang would be very good here. I think everyone thought that. It is ridiculously accurate on Nex, especially compared to all the other options. And just for some context, if you're unfamiliar with Nex, there was kind of a hot debate raging before this update on whether or not the Grazi Rapier or the Zerite Crossbow was best in slot for Nex, because even though the Rapier is, on paper, way better than the Crossbow, it was argued that because there's so much movement during the Nex fight, and since you'll be running around so much and missing hits, plus you have to switch to range for the Shadow Phase anyways, because you can't really stand next to her, and you range the minions usually, that the Zerite Crossbow would overall be better than the Rapier, factoring all of that in. And also, using a Rapier, you take more damage, which means you brew more, which means your stats are lowered more. So it was a very unclear consensus on which one was better. I think most people generally agreed Rapier was a little better, but a lot more effort. But now this clearly takes the cake. I mean, the Fang is already way better than the Rapier by a factor of 20%. And so that makes a weapon that's better than the weapon that was already better than the Zerite Crossbow. And this is of course completely anecdotal, but I did 10 mass kills, and I'm not super experienced with Nex or anything. I haven't done any small teams, but I did 10 mass kills and I MVP'd 2 out of the 10 of them. And that was using a T-bow with no range pot on the Shadow Phase plus minions. So the 4 out of 5 phases I was hitting her with a Fang, I was smacking her more than anyone else in the room, generally. So I have a lot of nostalgia for how solo Bandos used to be done way back in the day in RS2. I mean, if you guys remember, you would go in with a Divine or an Ellie, and by the way, I never did this, I was never rich enough for this, but I would watch videos of people doing this. You know, you'd go in with a Carol's Top, Bandos Tacits, Ellie, Chaotic Longsword, and that was the vibe. But that day has been long gone, and now this is as close as we can get to recreating it. I mean, to be clear, the Fang is way better than the Chaotic Longsword by a long shot, and the Rapier too against Corporeal, I think. So this is actually just more powerful, and yeah. So I just want to see how good is it to just run in and tank Corporeal like you used to. I'm gonna use no fancy tricks. I might step under every now and then, but people were doing that back then too, just not that many people. And we'll see how this goes. Also, I should mention, not only are we testing how well the Fang does on Corporeal, we are testing if it can do the impossible which is getting me a Bandos chestplate, getting me out of fighter torso hell, because I have been dragging around my fighter torso since I was like 800 total, and I would really like to stop if we could. Okay, I mean, that was almost a 0 damage kill. I took no damage until the very end, and I'm only missing, 11 HP. Very good start. Alright guys, I might have one more kill left in this trip, but this has been a 15 kill trip. And I have this whole thing recorded. That is insane. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I will not, embellish this. I got a lot of supply drops this trip, way more than you usually get, but even still, I've never gotten anything close to a 15 kill trip before with only, face tanking. I guess the one drawback of using the Fang is that there's almost quite literally no way to combo out your opponent. So, there's no chance that you just pop off and, kill it in a few hits. But, I mean, that's... okay. Okay, so to quickly break down what this actually means at Guardor, finally, triple flicking is a lot more competitive with the Bofa now, because if you go a full offense Fang build, like max melee instead of, all the defensive items I had, it's actually more DPS than the Bofa to do max melee hitting Guardor, which probably, efficiently requires you to triple flick it, which is one of my favorite methods in the game, so I'm very happy that that's back. But yeah, if you take a full offense setup with the Fang, it's actually better than Bofa, and that's before you even count the specs. With a Dragon Warhammer spec or with claws, that'll be even better. So I'm very happy that triple flicking is once again the king of Guardor, and I think Bodhi will be very happy too. That being said though, 2 Mech in Shadow is still best in slot here, but that's not accounting for the fact that you have to freeze Guardor, it's not accounting for the low defense of the mage setup, it's not accounting for the fact that the imbued heart damage falls off. After all of those factors are accounted for, it could well be that the full offense Fang triple flicking build with specs is about as good as the 2 Mech in Shadow build, we'll have to see. Now for another build straight out of my kitchen, we have Melee Saradomin, and Melee Sara is a build that I have been trying to theorycraft for a long time, just because it's interesting to me. And to be clear, it is far away from the other methods, especially now that the 2 Mech in Shadow is a thing. But still, let's just see how it goes. Okay, final stretch, let's talk about how the Fang does in all of the raids. So, we all already know in Tombs of a Mascot, it's absolutely amazing. One of the best weapons for the raid. I don't think anyone needs me to repeat that, so TOA, great. Chambers. Now, Chambers is very interesting, and there's a lot of factors going into Chambers because there's normal mode, challenge mode, and everyone kind of brings slightly different gear, I feel like. But honestly, what's something that's very surprising to me is that it is better on Tecton, for the most part, than Crush weapons. So I tried to calc all of this out as much as possible, but on normal Tecton with non-enrage, and regardless of the amount of spec weapons, it is better than any Crush weapon or a Scythe, except it loses to the Scythe with Inquisitor at 2 Dragon Warhammer specs. Okay, I think I'm going to take a chart for all of this for you guys to see, because you're not going to be able to keep track of all this, but it also loses to Inquisitor's Mace with full Inquisitor, unless you're in absolute max, and it's full total, full everything. Then the Fang wins by 1.2% with 0 specs only, 0 Dragon Warhammer specs, otherwise it loses to the Mace Inquisitor. Well, without Inquisitor, it beats any Crush weapon and Scythe. On a normal Tecton that's enraged, it beats Mace and Inquisitor in max by 0.25% at 0 cents, otherwise it loses. But it always beats Scythe and Inquisitor, and it always beats Bludgeon no matter what. In CMs, it beats Bludgeon always. It also, on 0 specs, beats Inquisitor Mace with Full Wizard. And then the Fang always beats Inquisitor plus Scythe. Okay, I know that was a lot, and the reason why I go through all these scenarios is because I know people who do CMs love all their min-maxing and they want to know all the details, so that's why I give them. Hopefully you could keep up with that. Ice Demon, well, I tried to DPS calc Ice Demon, but it doesn't really account for the damage properly, so right now at least the calculator is a little broken. I think it's better than the T-Bow on Ice Demon. Definitely not better than Fire Search, of course, but I do believe it's better than the T-Bow on Ice Demon. On Vanguards, it is better than the Lance on the normal Vanguards, and it's better than Scythe on CM Vanguards. So, like, on the range Vanguard, you pretty much should always use the Fang if you bring it. Against the melee Vanguard, which you normally mage, I believe in normal mode it's actually better than the Trident, but it is worse than max mage, okay? So Fang can be used on the melee Vanguard if you just have a Trident. In the CM against the melee Vanguard, it's worse than max mage, but better than Trident. So once again, in the CM, you can Fang the melee Vanguard if your mage setup is not that good. And finally, on Ulm, it's better in a CM only, not in regular Ulm, if you hit no hammers. But I know there's a lot of ifs here, but the nice thing about the Fang is that it's very good as a flex option, because since you can use it in so many rooms, then it's possible to find a space for it to just bring it in, and if these scenarios occur, you can pull it out, if that makes sense. I mean, you can bring it in place of like a crush weapon for Tecton, because it outperforms like a bludgeon, and you can like sub it in for other bosses as you need it. And what is also very surprising to me is that it's actually better on the glowing crystal in the Vasa room, in my setup at least, than the Dragon Hunter Lance on Stab. And this is going back to like the thing at the beginning of with what I was talking about with Corp, which is that even on low defense, the Osmumten's Fang is still a pretty powerful weapon overall, so it still beats out the Lance on the glowing crystal. That's just interesting to me. As for the Theater of Blood, the findings I had were also very interesting. So the Fang is better than the Cell Door on Verzik P2 if you put it on Slash, and that's also accounting for the 15-16 cycle instead of the 4-tick cycle you get to do with Verzik. So that also of course means it's better than the Whip. Of course it is not as good as the Scythe, but on Slash it is also better than the Cell Door on Verzik P3. So basically, if you have free space, you can bring in the Fang and hit Verzik P2 and P3 with it for even more damage than any weapon besides the Scythe. Also, on Soditseg, it is better than the Cell Door even with 2 Warhammers, which is the maximum amount you can get on Sod, by the way, if you don't know that. It is also slightly better than the Scythe if you hit no hammers. So honestly, I'm thinking that it's pretty worthy of a conclusion. You can use it on Soditseg even if you have a Scythe. I mean, of course, if you have a Scythe, you won't bring it in, but if you are using a Whip or Cell Door and you have a Fang, definitely consider bringing it in for Verzik and Soditseg. Okay, now for a real quick miscellaneous power hour. It's best in slot versus Jads for melee Infernos, so if you're doing the combat tasks, you might want to bring it for Jad. Giant Mole. The Fang beats everything at the Giant Mole, and I mean everything except max range, which means full Masoris, Zerite Vams, T-Bow, Dragon Arrows. In any other case, it is the best in slot, although granted, range is almost always still going to be better because you don't have to run around as much since you have long range, of course. Sarachnis. On Slash, it is better than the Bludgeon, but loses to Scythe. So to wrap all of this up, the Fang is freaking good. It is best in slot in only a few places, but it's very, very good in many others. And I've heard a lot of discussion on whether or not it should be nerfed, and listen, I don't want to be the fun police here. I don't honestly have an opinion on whether or not it needs to be nerfed. It's a very cool and interesting weapon, and I think RuneScape needs more of that. And I also think it's great that there's an accessible and fun raid that people can do and also get drops from, unlike entry mode Tob. But the one thing I will say is that the drops might need to be rebalanced, okay? Because you can start getting a Fang at 50 Invocation, and if you really think about that, you can go on a 50 Invocation raid and camp for the Fang with like a Dragon Scimitar and Ivan's Blast if you really want to. And should you really be able to get a Fang at that point, a weapon this good, especially speaking about Iron Man, like Iron Man is all about progression, right, and sensible progression. And so if you get a Fang that early, you're going to be disincentivized from getting so many other things because you have a weapon that's better than all of them. You know what I mean? So hear me out here. I propose switching the Eladinus' Ward and the Osmumten's Fang. Because think about it. Getting a 3% magic damage offhand is still really nice, especially since magic is so weak at that stage of the game, and late game too. And it also motivates people to keep grinding and go and eventually get to corp so that they can get an arcane and attach it to their ward. And also people are complaining that the ward is really bad, which I don't necessarily agree with, but why not let the people who could actually use it have it, you know what I mean? Like, it makes so much more sense to give this to a mid-game player than an end-game player who's using a two-handed staff already, you know what I mean? And it kind of reminds me of the Bofa in the sense that it's an item you can rush pretty early in the game if you know what you're doing, and it's ridiculously accurate and breaks the meta, kind of. But the difference here is that the Bofa was put in because we lost the blowpipe, right? And there's nothing to replace it. So that at least makes some sense. The Fang is just kind of randomly there and you can just get it. And I just think like it would break the early game way too much. And I think people would have less fun with it because you'd be less incentivized to go for different goals because there'd be no reason to. But let me know what you think, if you agree, if you disagree, or what you think should be done, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.